Hi everyone, my name is Alessandro Orlandi. I'm an artist, researcher, writer who works in multimedia and social engaged art. I've been living and working in Beijing for around 20 years, I think 18, 19. That's where I've developed most of my grown up work as an artist. And in 2010, I got an opportunity. I met randomly the CEO of an industrial company, and I came up with an idea to invent a sort of a job and department that allowed artists to be paid a regular salary to spend 1 day a week in encountering factory workers, managers, and engaging in discussions that eventually can bring to the creation of artworks that belong and have the authorship and the copyright of the people that actually created them. We had over officially around 40 artists in short-term residencies, and we have around the same amount of projects by factory workers that have been displayed in various museums and galleries and institutions in China, but also in Europe. You might have seen something about this before in a previous video by Mo that was recent retrospective at the Goethe Institute of Beijing, which is the most comprehensive exhibitions that we had about the 13 years of this project, which is still ongoing. And I hope this kind of project and all the spirits, all the big moments that you can find on the website can inspire people to start projects involving communities and try to find different ways to be together and to create something that is sustainable for people to address art and be art users, being creators, bring all that experience in their lives.
Hello, hello.
Hello, hi.
Hey, welcome back to our channel. Today we're joined by an exceptional guest, Alessandro Orlandi. He's an artist, curator, researcher, and he's a dear friend of mine for nearly 2 decades. We first crossed paths in China in 798 during its golden era. And we worked on different art projects independently. And after a long time, we haven't, met. And it's great to have you here. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Very nice to see you again.
The main reason that I've asked Alessandro to join us today is his social art project, Social Sensibility Research and Development, which he initiated 13 years ago in China. Could you introduce yourself a little bit more and what brought you to China and why you started this project?
I'm one of these people who got to art and culture because it's the most interesting way for me to encounter the world. I've studied chemistry, experimental theater, history of art, and I'm currently starting a master in global media and digital culture. So I'm a very curious person. I went to China in end of 2002 for staying 6 months, and I was in the backpack of my partner that then became my wife that had a contract to work as an editor for Xinhua, and we were living at Yoyibingwan. It's an historical place where the foreign correspondent and foreign experts were allowed to live. And we were supposed to stay 6 months, and we stayed 20 years almost. So, and everything was happening. You've been there. So, Beijing had this special moment in time where there was so many transformation going on through the society, through the economy, through the culture, through everything. And for a while, China was interesting. So there was a special energy, and I was just wrapped up by the energy. I had my first studio in 798 when we were like 4 or 5 artists, and there were still factory workers all over around. Then I had a studio in Feijiazun, Suojiazun, Caochandi, and there was this community, there was this very organic way to be with people, and it was very surprising, very unique. I was supported and integrated in this thriving community. And then, little by little, the studio work became more and more interested and directed towards something that was then defined socially engaged art. I think when we first started to create group projects that were addressing the public space and in a very spontaneous way, I want to underline how what happened there was something that drove you towards the society, because this was a society that was in a special historical moment, openness, movement, transformation. You remember in Beijing, you would leave for holiday, come back and don't recognize your neighborhood. You know, this kind of transformation that's not only in the social process, but also in the physicality of the space that you inhabit. My personal enlightenment was a moment where I would say, like, whatever I do in the studio, if I take a walk outside in Beijing, what happens is more radical, more interesting, more varied than what I can come up with in my studio. So I started going out, walking, taking photographs, and then joined with other people who had similar intentions. We started to organize performances and actions in public space. But the point was not to establish a relationship of confrontation, but was always to create some kind of suspension, some kind of twisting the situation in a way that would create the attention of the population, and to basically witness this moment where that had no clear purpose apart the one of bringing something creative and artistic and spontaneous to the public sphere, so bypassing also the galleries, the institutions, they would not necessarily understand, but they were curious about. So that was extremely stimulating. I've learned a lot, shared a lot, and then for a chance, again, you know, chance, synchronicity, you can call it as you want. I happened to meet a person who's a French entrepreneur who had a factory in Beijing, factory in Paris, and he was interested in art not as a collector or a commissioner, but as what art can do. This was 2010, so it was already 7, 8 years I was in Beijing. I found myself in a situation to, in a way, to give something back, to find a role that made sense for me, apart from being the Western that had a sensibility that could function in the Chinese cultural tradition. For a moment, I had a chance to access an environment which is very symbolic, like a factory, for China and for the world, for globalization.
I left China in 2009. So when you had all this project, I followed just on social media. So I'm not really familiar with what exactly you do. Can you tell a little bit about like how does it really work?
Basically, we at the beginning it had to be a sort of fictional unit. Let's call it social sensibility R&D department. No, in a factory you have HR, you have finance, you have technical R&D. So we discussed with the CEO, but also with the other managers, and trying to play with the terminology. And this was then authorized and legitimized in the company, in the organigram, you know, like you have all the other departments. Then we set up a system of salaries for artists as being present in the factory once or twice a week. And we established the rule that people in the factory, only on a voluntary base, this is very important because what makes the project different from the, you know, corporate culture, all this stuff, they could take time, even from work, if they thought that their workload was lighter in one day, or they finish, or they can manage, to spend time with the artist. And during this conversation, I would eventually throw some conceptual art pieces. From these chats and this conversation, some people would start and try to make something creative spontaneously. And at that point, the artist would become a sort of assistant developing an idea, helping creating a piece. There was no limit of mediums, no limit of expression. The works didn't have to be about the company or the company products, and all the works of art would belong to the people who made it. Again, this is something very clear in the contracts, because normally whatever happens in a company belongs to the company. So it was very unique that I negotiated these elements because I wanted to set up a spontaneous atmosphere within a structured environment. You know, it was a kind of paradox. And they believed me, and it's 13 years that it's happening in China, is 7 in Paris, and 2 or 3 in, it's not really a factory, but near Milan, there is a workshop, like a laboratory and offices. And many things happened. And along the years, there were 2 lines of work. So this one that is endorsed by the artist who is the social sensibility manager. And there were temporary external residencies from artists that were meant to spend 3 months and 1.5 months just to meet people, encounter people. This encounter that is not necessary and is not mandatory. The whole economic system to create this sort of structure was meant to support this encounter, the time, the research, and not the production. The production are kind of traces, leftovers, and some of them are really good, some are interesting artistically too, but we always insisted that what was important to establish this relational situation that is unusual, and that would trigger a lot of side effects that you cannot control. So there was not even like a clear purpose besides that of highlighting the contradictions between art, work, and life. And this was clear from the moment. We didn't disguise it as coaching, as this kind of things.
Let me be the devil's advocate. For me, this is occupational art therapy. And you disguise it into social art. Can I say that?
Okay, yeah, that's a good provocation. No, it's really about the relationship. It's nice. It's really good to have this kind of questions. Art therapy is a discipline now, you know, and you get a degree in psychology and art and whatever, and then your relationship to whatever is the audience is well established from the beginning. So you are using art as a form of therapy with a purpose that is, well, from entertainment to some sort of skill developing, or I don't know. I have a cousin who does this. I don't really know how is the framework. So what's important for me is really the quality of the encounter, because in the spontaneity and this kind of ambiguity where we define the structure, it was not really clear why the artist was there. You know, like he was not there as a therapist. He was not there as a teacher. It was not there. It was there as an artist, and in a way, quite exposed. And that was precious for me. Like the work is, after a couple of weeks where they drop the kind of, the distance and things, they start asking very provocative questions to artists, like, well, what are you doing? How you make a living? What's the importance of art? So they didn't feel like they were in a relationship that is defined from the beginning, like there's somebody coming in, delivering you a service, which it's very useful. I'm not, denigrating art therapy or whatever, but there were no there were no patients and no therapists. They were like artists parachuted into a working environment with all the difficulties, and this strange rule negotiated, people can take time to spend with you. So I imagine many people at the beginning took time because it was just, okay, so I don't work, I can spend some time. But the relationship from the beginning was, I would say, it demanded a form of courtesy, inclusiveness that was not obvious. There's an artist around, you could talk to them. And you talk about what? Why is around? Is it doing something, or is just around? And For the whole project, I've invited many different artists, critics that, came with their own feedback. It was just like, oh, it should be more educational. It should be more political. It should be more therapeutic. And I would say, well, you come and orient your temporary project in that direction. But for me, is to create this environment where I would be surprised by what can happen. Like I was not sure that people would start asking to make art or maybe just asking to have artists doing art and watching them, and all this different kind of relationship developed in a very natural way. So there were moments where there were more people interested to make art and other moments where people were more interested in having visitors and so they could see other artists. So, and we adjusted the methodology with what was happening. It was a privilege that was accepted in the company because it was not like, okay, there is the art time every Friday from 10 to 12, It was just this strangeness of having these people around and then things would just happen. And we've been able to carry it on like that. Of course, partly it makes it a weak point because people say, like, what's the purpose of it? On the other side, whatever happened was, I would say, pretty authentic because there was never any obligation. Sometimes I said I want to turn them into art users instead of art viewers.
What are the profiles of artists who joined? Are they foreign? Are they Chinese? And what attracted them to come and participate in such projects? And what do they get?
It was surprising that as soon as I communicated with this network that I've built around 8 years, so again, this whole thing came together. It's not just about me. It's more like I was an antenna receiving inputs and spotting moments. They were artists engaged in, their own studio practice, but with a strong interest in society. There was this system of payment because that was part of my old project, make something sustainable. But people would come for free. I just remember people would refuse. I would say like, no, I don't want, just give my salary to make a banquet for the workers so we spend it in materials if workers want to do things. And this is, for me, very precious. And the response from these people was like, we're going to come. Then, you pay us. Oh, maybe I don't need, or so this is something else that is actually very different in the experience in the West.
Your project is really hard to define because, the title of your project is social sensibility, but this term isn't really widely applied or known. I think the closest thing I can, put it in a box, if I have to put it in a box, it will be social art, to create a social impact benefiting the society. But would you define it as social art?
It definitely enters this large sphere, The challenge I proposed was that socially engaged art is always spontaneously started with self-referential, resources and self-started. And so, even in the most organized way, they don't rely on another entity, so they address a community. They can start having this micro action and interact with the community accept them. What I did is just like to try to turn this into a more complex situation. You have a factory that is for profit, a company, so a completely different institution, and negotiate with them to create a unit of socially engaged art, within a situation which is highly contradictory. So, there was this artist, friend, my own friend, who twisted the company motto was invest in confidence, and he twisted it in a graffiti like invest in contradiction. And this is really something peculiar because in a way, I always wanted to see what happened if you put artists and art in a place where they don't naturally belong. maybe it's more selfish, but for me there was this element of provocation. Like, what happens if you really put artists talking, their process, what happened into a productive unit? What will happen? Maybe in 3 months they will kick us off, and there will be people denounced to the police.
I was gonna say, but it's really weird. Why would this company want to do it? I looked it up. Burnout Control is a nuclear valve manufacturer. I mean, it's so specific. Do you think it's like widely applicable, your practice?
I mean, theoretically, it's not difficult because it's just a formalization of this idea that you want to bring art and artists to the community. But there's two elements that are uh, unique. I mean, first of all, as you understand, for a company that does B2B, and they do actuators, which has this valves that go on every kind of pipes, nuclear, water, and things. So they don't gain in image too much because it's a very hardcore engineer, a bit machist word. So it's not one of these companies that, you wash your face with art. You probably get mocked by your, your,
British Petroleum.
exactly. So they have a tradition of people who were working in culture, but not as collectors of things, but as conservateurs de musée and things. So, and they have a tradition of being a company that is socially engaged. This is the first patriarchal capitalism, which is Italian, Spanish, German. It's the family, the industry, and somehow, you cannot defend completely the system, but in that case, the person had also a social responsibility, because when you set up a factory, you give work you can choose to set up your factory in a nice place or maybe in a difficult area to help the local situation, to give employment, to take people out of, I don't know, radicalization or crime or things. And this exists both in Italy and in France, this tradition of the entrepreneur, but the industrial capitalism, where you have to build the facility infrastructures. So they had this tradition, like in the factory in Paris, there are people who have worked there 40 years, and then they had all their cousins hired, and when they need a stage and things. So there is this paternalistic attitude, but somehow you always have to put face, for your action. It's not like I'm delocalizing here and there and then I'm not responsible for what happened. So you can work with this kind of capitalistic thing. Now, where I found very difficult to replicate the model is the trust. Like the department was given to an artist, and apart the first 2 months where the direction was present to tell people why we were there and that we were there and we were allowed. Otherwise, I would just hear from them when there was a problem. This had two effects. One, that you could see that they really gave trust to an artist, not a manager who's interested in corporate responsibility, but it comes from their field. And the second, that by giving this trust, in China at least, people start thinking that could be something for them. It was just, okay, now that it's set, there are the rules, then when there's problems, I get a message and I have to deal with the problems. This worked in that sense. Like when people start looking at this, well, I mean, they're here. I'm interested. My colleague hates them. I don't know why, but I take my chance. We have discussion. So that I found it very difficult, because whenever I spoke to other companies who were interested or blah, blah, there's always an issue with the control of what happens, with the final output that has to be, aligned with the positive thinking, with it's not investing contradiction. It's not,
It's getting political. I mean, usually when you say social art, it can be political, but not necessarily. But it's a fine line.
I think is for me, there's a difference between art and politics. For me, art is always something subtle and of the nature of sensibility, and politics is something very direct. So I'm always a bit skeptical of full political art because of that. Because I think art is more about imagining other ways. So I articulate it like this. I think we're dealing with the micropolitics. The micropolitics are also those who address people's everyday life, is the one where you can exercise political activity, but you're not dealing with big system, or, like, you're not trying to dismantle or to create some sort of, I don't know, organization or something. I'm more interested in this thing of, if you could call it soft subversion, but also, not everyone wants to become a martyr, but everyone enjoys to be naughty. Everyone enjoys to push the limits of what they can do. And I think, it's very interesting to notice, and I think the Chinese are great at doing this, but how, if you gain a little bit of freedom in small things every day, how your way of being in a place like workplace where you have to deal with hierarchy, stress and things, how it can shift, how the personalities changes, not because of a big fight or a big discussion, but because, I like to bring plants here, and I like to bring animals while I'm working, and I like to have time to smoke a cigarette with the artist. I like to do my things. And I think this is something for me where I'm interested in social engaged art. I've done something more, if you want, more uh, aggressive, but that's another, if you're taking fields and then you're fighting, that's another situation. For me, social engaged art, again, I say for me, there's different opinions, is to imagine this different environment with something that cannot happen. Zones of freedom where you mold your freedom, your imagination, that are not just locked up in these dualistic things where you're always fighting. Like, it's more like, and I can make an example. An artist brought small speakers for music, and at the very beginning, when they were not uh, common on the market, the factory manager, we didn't tell him. So he come down and there's old people listen to music, and they're very cute because at 3 meters you can listen to something else. You don't bother each other, no? But in industrial factory, music is forbidden because there's heavy gear and stuff, no? Okay, so there was a big tension, blah, blah, whatever. After 2 years, the company allowed speakers. So how did it happen? I don't know. Like, there was an artist discussed with people. The people said, we like to listen to music, but it's forbidden. So he said, okay, I can make a speaker and do this. Then the manager gets crazy, mad. No, this is impossible. But then the things keep going, and we were not even aware. And after 3 years, the company allows people to have the speakers. I'm talking about this, how you push boundaries that you can actually push. Like, and in a way that can be by humor, by transgressing, but in a way that everybody can grow some confidence, some sense of, I want to improve how I stay here because I stay 8 years here. So I want to see my redfish here. Well, take the redfish. So the department becomes granting of this, you know, micro zones of politics and negotiations. No? Make sense? Or...
Makes sense. Makes sense. You have this little fine line to walk between recreational rights and demands and industrial safety and standard and practices, and it's always a little micro conflicts, and you are like trying to use the art project to gain freedom. And I mean, I get the idea now. But I think it is a very utopia idea. And I think most of the migrant workers, that I've met, they don't have the capacity to be trained, to be integrated immediately in that direct exposure. Do you think it would make sense to actually bring art to further down deeper into rural China or rural another country,
To me, art is always born from something near you and from an experience that involves your body, your mind, but not necessarily in a very intellectual ways. There are certain kind of art. I mean, even conceptual art itself, for the thing, it would be very intellectual, but in the way that you can ask somebody, can you express the word border by using just what you have on your desk? That's a very simple task, but some people can surprise you, and they're not big minds. You know what I mean? Because literally, I think some people have, when I'm talking about sensibility and not art, some people have a different way to express themselves, and sensibility is this, is not, how to say, it's not something of a higher level. It's just something that you might just develop to survive in an environment that is complex, or in an environment, for instance, that is very simple. You have very limited resources. So you pay a lot of attention to all your resources. You know very well all your materials. You become a master in every gesture just by the fact of being uh, ecological in terms of, saving resources. You're doing the best you can with the little available facilities, so there is something you can play with that. Art has become very intellectual, but, I don't know if it's something that can just exist over there.
Art has always been very intellectual and has always been very elitist. That is the issue when you get your hands onto social art, I guess.
Can I smoke? Do you mind, or is bad for the video?
You can smoke, but smoking kills. You might get lung cancer.
Life kills.
Did you start smoking in China? Because it's a really Chinese thing.
No, I was always a social smoker. I remember one person defending the project, a factory worker manager, would say like, I don't know exactly what you're doing. I guess, sometimes it feels like you're paid to smoke cigarettes with us. And I just like this kind of humor is some of the best memories. Now I want to specify something. The quality and the situation of the factory workers. And this is not to highlight Bernard's, but I visited Chinese factories. The rhythm of works, the quality of there was encouraging for trying something like this. I visited other places where I think people need so much more before art. So this is important. It's not aspect that I didn't consider, like,
I totally understand. Let me quickly tell a little bit about the situation. I didn't leave China until I was 24, so I was made in China 100%, born and raised in China. So I would say working for a foreign company in China is like going to international school. You're privileged. You have more access to occupational education, training. You have more access to, let's say, work overseas and exchange, and it's a better condition. Definitely, is a luck, and the requirement is also in general higher. So there are only like 13% of people received some levels of university education as a migrant worker in China. So I guess that's 13%. If it's not like all of them, but a majority of them would end up working for foreign international companies in China. But when you go to the lower of the bottom of the precarious working population in China, yeah, it gets harder and harder to work with, to even find time in their life to think about art. Like if you watch Wang Bing's documentary, for example, there's one, I think in Documenta, it's called 15 Hours. And it was a shift of worker that who worked 15 hours straight, basically, and it's documenting that one shift.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've visited Foxconn, so and I remember I think it was a young artist who made this piece that he basically worked as much as to be able to pay for the iPhone. It was like a symbolic denunciation for yeah, again, it was you know, some people could say this is social art, but basically some of the workers would just come up with the provocation and say like, you know, we don't need you guys to remember us of our condition. We know our condition. So this is the kind of things that surprised me. And this is another point about this whole artist rescuing people. For me, social art, you can say, when you use the word utopia, it's a utopian action in the sense of inventing new ways to be together. So that means that, like, I've learned a lot. It's not a rhetorical way. I've learned some witty stories. I've learned some, you know, there was a worker who then left, but we were creating with him a book about inventing your own games because he was coming from a very poor village and he was telling us all the games they invented with, you know, small things. They were just from wrapping together chopsticks to catch scorpions and then getting ice cream, you know, like, and now you have all these movements about in a civilized society where they want to bring back kids away from the tablets and being in nature and being capable to build their own toys and all these things that I partly, very partly, just in my first 5, 6 years, I've lived similar things in rural Italy when I grew up. And for this person was just normal. It was just his life, his childhood. So then we couldn't finalize the project. He went to work far away, quit the company. But there is this element of, you know, art can rescue, save. I think that there is this exchange of sensibilities, you know, in a way, because the communication happens on a level where you're trying to find the best quality of a person, and you try to maybe even move conflict or confrontation to a more sophisticated level, more smart level, you know, like, and this to me is interesting. So the idea that artists go to rescue whoever or whatever, I'm very doubtful. You know, like you're providing a set of skills, and again, maybe it's not the skills, but this training, this sensibility that maybe can enhance dignity, self-confidence in people, and then they use it the way they want.
I'm really touched when you say make the artist be with the people, right? Like it's an equal kind of level playing field when you make art project, not let the artist influence, impact, direct, and lead the project. And I think that's the essence of your project. Actually, you're also an artist. I define your way of art, your style, as abstract Chinese calligraphy, because it's kind of abstract and it's with Chinese calligraphic style, but I don't really understand the writing or drawing. Tell us a little bit about your own art practice.
Well, yeah, it's always been informed by drawing, you know, like drawing, and then I do figurative drawing. Then I slightly went into text, into this kind of. And in China, I was actually I have made copies of the wild grass style of old calligraphy, and then from there I started to develop this kind of energy or thing, and it was one of the things that I've been doing a lot of performance video. But I was surprised that some people who actually are into calligraphy in China invite me to show some of these works, because to me calligraphy was a bit like classical music. It's something that if you're not super trained, so I'm still figuring out what they saw in these works. I think it stays in the section that's called New Ink, which is a very vague definition. I was encouraged mostly by the artists who had this knowledge. So I would just not, I wouldn't say no, like because I was it was curious to see that they probably see in this line in this particular style, or one of the four styles of calligraphy. The other ones, if you're not trained since you're a kid, seems quite unlikely to reach decent level. But it's probably the whole idea of using the line and the space in a certain way. For me, what was important is that not starting from an abstract thing. I do whatever I want, but starting from a character or some strokes, and then take some of these elements. So you're starting from something that is deconstructed. You're not just like, okay, now I feel angry and I'm going to do this and that, like, which is the abstract expressionism side. So this is one another interesting thing of my relationship to China.
If an artist wants to participate in your project, how does it work? Who can apply? Who can get involved? Do you need a visa? Do they get paid? How about accommodation? All the logistic questions. Can you let us know a little bit?
Well, of course, they had to say that because of the project to be, I would say, so sustainable, we did a budget that could not in any way disturb the company budget. So I think that the availability is on the local places. So if it's in France, if it's in Beijing and in Milan, we haven't started yet. It's only 2 years knowing people. In Beijing, we have used mostly words of mouth, and the project is very well known. So along the years, we have reduced the residencies to have a couple of a year. They can get a fee, like a salary, to come over. We can pay a train ticket, but we cannot pay an airplane or things like that. And in Paris, it's the same. We got to two or one residence. It depends, because also now that the project is developed, we try to see different profiles. And in Paris, we put out a call in this kind of art organizations, where you put an open call. So if there is the time and the regular budget, we put out a call once a year or twice a year. They can send a portfolio. In Beijing, we have the luxury to still be able to invite people, because we know many people and they know us. So we invite people to take a tour.
When you say invite people, do you mean that it's by invitation only? Like, are you open in any sense for complete strangers to get in touch and propose a project?
I mean, in Paris, we've gone for that option. In Beijing, we didn't. I mean, we always had the luxury of being known and knowing. So often, the people who come are, recommended or heard of another person. So far, we didn't put any. We're not open to strangers. It's just, it's very, it's something that's known. So often comes like that, by words of mouth. And while in Paris, we put out a generic call for project with an introduction. So, I mean, the residence in Paris is quite well paid. It's kind of 3,000 euros for.
If you have to complete the sentence, like, oh, this specific project didn't work out and it was a lot of stress, but at least, how do you complete this sentence? For you, self-reconciliation, like, how would you say, at least I get paid, or like.
Yeah. No, anytime it doesn't work out, but there is a bit of a real discussion. It's okay if it doesn't work out, but there has been. I remember a project of an artist that challenged the manager, and they sit down to talk 2 hours to see if what would happen if people would spend 1 hour a day meditating on a rock, how much the production would be affected. So obviously they couldn't. They just did once a performance, but they cannot do it. But I was thinking, well, they have to make money. It's a competitive thing, And the manager is taking serious this artist, talking 2 hours, make the calculation to come out. That's an interesting thing. So I would say at least there was this exchange, which is, that cannot quantify, doesn't make sense. If that happens, I'm always happy. I mean, uh, it's okay. What I don't like is when it's dismissed with condescendence, you know. So criticism is good and interesting. Engagement. If it's dismissed with condescendence or with, like mean mockery, the artist don't belong here, it's just for rich people, this kind of stuff, it's legitimate, but we've showed respect too. We've given, a lot of years of our life to be there, and I never considered this as something that just mine. That's also the difference. Like for me, uh, it's not something you can do alone. It's something that you do because there are other people who participate, help, criticize, and things. So that's another thing with social engaged art, which I found it's quite difficult. In many groups, there's always a tendency then to create a bunch of or a form of very strict leadership or guidance or so it's difficult even for me. I'm not agreeing with everything that's putting forward. I have to force myself to, if I respect the person, I said, well, there must be a reason that's saying this. So
Can people get in touch with you if they want, if they're interested in your project? I'll leave a link of the website of the project in the description of the video, and also your own page in case if they want to get in touch.
yeah, there's 2 pages internet. On Instagram, there's a channel for the social sensibility and a channel for me. And yeah, people can reach out, and there's room for, input.
Cool. Great. And just before leaving, I just want to give a big shout out to our lovely patrons. We have a Patreon page, and that's how we support the channel. And we don't get sponsored by a nuclear valve parts company. So, so yeah. And thanks for watching this video as well. And let's call it a day.
Yeah, thank
Bye.
you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.